The road stretched ahead like a promise broken too many times. Selene Hart's car, custom matte black, electric coupe that cost more than most people's homes, had coasted to a stop in the middle of nowhere. Somewhere between Big Sur's jagged cliffs and a coastal highway dotted with forgotten motels, the dashboard flashed red. She tapped the screen once, twice. Nothing. A growl rose in her throat. But she swallowed it. Selene didn't raise her voice, didn't curse, not even when stranded miles from reception with the fog rolling in like a threat. Her assistant would be panicking by now. The last time Selene had gone radio silent for more than 15 minutes. Her CFO filed a missing persons report, but now, all she could hear was the tick of the cooling engine and the ocean's whisper beyond the cliffs. She got out. The air was sharp, tasting of salt and pine. Her heels crunched on gravel. She looked entirely out of place. Fitted charcoal trousers, silk blouse, phone in one manicured hand. Jaw clenched like a vice. A distant engine approached. Selene turned, expecting a tourist or worse, a local with questions. Instead, the bike that rolled up was battered, blue, and loud its rider even more so. She wore a leather jacket dusted in road grime, jeans with one knee torn open, and thick boots meant for work, not aesthetics. Her helmet came off in one fluid motion, revealing dark curls, tan skin, and eyes that sized Selene up like she was both an alien and a dare. "You're blocking the road," the woman said. Straddling the bike with lazy confidence, Selene arched a brow. "You're the only traffic I've seen in 20 minutes. The woman smirked. "Still counts." Silence stretched. "Then, engine trouble?" "No, I just enjoy parking dramatically in inconvenient places." The biker laughed. It was low and sudden and real. "Name's Quinn," she said, kicking the stand and dismounting. "I run the only garage within 30 miles. "Lucky you." Selene didn't believe in luck, but when Quinn walked past her, crouched beside the coupe, and popped the hood like she'd done it 1,000 times, Selene didn't stop her. Something about this woman felt like the exact opposite of everything Selene had built her life to avoid. Raw, unfiltered, unimpressed, ever driven this beauty off a runway? Quinn asked, fingers skimming the engine. "It's a car, not a handbag." Quinn glanced up, grinned. "And you talk like someone who eats spreadsheets for breakfast." "I do." "With espresso?" Quinn laughed again, softer this time. "Well, spreadsheet, you're gonna need a tow. And a place to crash. Town's 10 minutes east." "I'll call a truck." Selene hesitated. She didn't do tow trucks. She didn't do detours, but Quinn was already dialing, already walking toward her bike, already taking control without pretending it. Was anything else? Selene followed, just for now. The town was small enough to miss if you blinked, but it smelled like rain and old wood, and the neon flicker of a diner sign welcomed them like a memory Selene didn't have. Quinn parked the bike in front of a garage that looked older than the road itself, its sign crooked, one letter dark. Rivera Repairs. It read. Quinn shoved open the side door. "Make yourself at home. I'll check on your car later tonight. Need to run diagnostics." Selene stepped in, pausing. The garage was chaos and motion tools strewn, classic rock humming from an old radio, a massive dog asleep under a workbench. But it was warm. A live dot, she stood stiffly near the door, unsure where to place her hands. Quinn returned with a towel. "You look like a cat stuck in a rainstorm." "That's because I am." Quinn tossed her the towel. Selene caught it, barely. "You always this stiff? You always this rude?" "Only with people who look like they've never had mud on their shoes." Selene glanced down. Her heels were ruined. So were her socks. "There's a B&B down the road," Quinn said, already pulling off her jacket. "The owner's weird, but the sheets are clean." Quinn's bike growled to life again, a familiar beast under her control, as Selene swung a leg over the seat behind her, unsure why she'd said yes. She didn't ride motorcycles. She didn't follow strangers to cliff sides. But her hand landed on Quinn's hip, instinctive and cautious, and for a moment, the entire world narrowed to leather, wind, and a woman who didn't flinch. They rode without words. The road curved like a whisper, cliffs rising on one side, the ocean sprawled endlessly on the other. Fog feathered the shoulders of the cypresses. Gulls wheeled like bits of torn paper against a pale sky. Celine closed her eyes once, just once, and let the wind unravel her, a careful stitch pulled free from the seam of a life sewn too tight. The engine's hum slipped through her spine and strangely soothed Dot when Quinn downshifted. The bike purred as if pleased with itself. They crested a hill and drifted into a turnout cut into the cliffs, a pocket of dirt and rock that looked carved by the hand of someone who knew people needed a place to stop pretending they were in a hurry. The overlook was empty save for a crooked fence and a Quinn-operated telescope that had given up on coins a decade ago. The horizon laid itself out like a dare. Quinn parked, kicked a stand, and peeled off her helmet with a satisfied hum. "Told you it was worth it." Selene took a breath. So high in distance. Her hair had come loose from its disciplined twist. A few strands stuck to her cheek and tasted like wind. "It doesn't look real," she murmured. "It does when you let it," Quinn replied, hopping onto a sun-warmed rock like she'd done it 1,000 times. She tipped her face up to the light as if greeting an old friend. Celine stayed standing. She wasn't good at stillness. Wasn't good at quiet unless she was the one controlling it. Her body knew boardroom posture, car service posture, interview posture. This hands empty, heart undecided was unfamiliar terrain. Quinn patted the rock beside her. "I won't bite." "What a disappointment," Celine said before she could stop herself. Quinn's grin was immediate, delighted. "There she is." Celine felt heat bloom low in her sternum. She sat. For a while, they let the ocean do the talking. Waves wore themselves thin on the black teeth of rock below. A fisherman's boat moved like a sentence written too small to read. The sun hung low, casting orange streaks across the water that looked almost edible. Celine's hair whipped around her face until she tucked it behind one ear, fingers brushing skin that felt oddly warm. Oddly hers. "So," Quinn said, voice casual, stretched out on her hands with her boots crossed at the ankles. "What does a woman like you do?" "Define woman like me." Quinn looked at her, slow and unapologetic. "Expensive watch. Shoes that cost more than my rent. That look like you haven't let anyone touch you in years." Celine didn't react. Not visibly. Her chest went tight, then looser, as if something had been correctly named. "Tech," she said after a pause. "Software, infrastructure, automation systems." Quinn whistled. "Fancy. You asked, and you answered like a press release." Celine exhaled through her nose. "I run a company. It requires precision." Quinn nodded as if tabling the point. "And loneliness?" Celine blinked, a small, involuntary startle. "I didn't ask for a therapy session," she said tightly. Quinn didn't apologize. She just looked at her, steady, real. "Maybe you didn't," she said. "But you also didn't walk away." A gull landed on the broken fence and screamed at no one. The sound somehow made room for softer things. Quinn nudged a pebble with the toe of her boot until it tumbled, end over end toward the edge. "My turn," she said. "I fix what people love when it breaks. Sometimes that's a carburetor. Sometimes it's the only things they have left of someone." She shrugged. "It's not fancy, but it's honest." "That sounds like a press release too," Celine said, almost smiling. "Fine. The honest version? I like the way machines tell asterisk." "What a disappointment," Celine said before she could stop herself. Quinn's grin was immediate, delighted. "There she is." Celine felt heat bloom low in her sternum. She sat. For a while, they let the ocean do the talking. Waves wore themselves thin on the black teeth of rock below. A fisherman's boat moved like a sentence written too small to read. The sun hung low, casting orange streaks across the water that looked almost edible. Celine's hair whipped around her face until she tucked it behind one ear, fingers brushing skin that felt oddly warm. Oddly hers. So, Quinn said, voice casual, stretched out on her hands with her boots crossed at the ankles. What does a woman like you do? Define woman like me. Quinn looked at her, slow and unapologetic. Expensive watch. Shoes that cost more than my rent. That look like you haven't let anyone touch you in years. Selene didn't react. Not visibly. Her chest went tight, then looser, as if something had been correctly named. Tech, she said after a pause. Software, infrastructure, automation systems. Quinn whistled. Fancy. You asked, and you answered like a press release. Selene exhaled through her nose. I run a company. It requires precision. Quinn nodded as if tabling the point. And loneliness? Selene blinked, a small, involuntary startle. I didn't ask for a therapy session, she said tightly. Quinn didn't apologize. She just looked at her, steady, real. Maybe you didn't, she said. But you also didn't walk away. A gull landed on the broken fence and screamed at no one. The sound somehow made room for softer things. Quinn nudged a pebble with the toe of her boot until it tumbled, end over end toward the edge. My turn, she said. I fix what people love when it breaks. Sometimes that's a carburetor. Sometimes it's the only things they have left of someone. She shrugged. It's not fancy, but it's honest. That sounds like a press release too, Selene said, almost smiling. Fine. The honest version? I like the way machines tell asterisk. What a disappointment, Selene said before she could stop herself. Quinn's grin was immediate, delighted. There she is. Selene felt heat bloom low in her sternum. She sat. For a while, they let the ocean do the talking. Waves wore themselves thin on the black teeth of rock below. A fisherman's boat moved like a sentence written too small to read. The sun hung low, casting orange streaks across the water that looked almost edible. Selene's hair whipped around her face until she tucked it behind one ear, fingers brushing skin that felt oddly warm. Oddly hers. So, Quinn said, voice casual, stretched out on her hands with her boots crossed at the ankles. What does a woman like you do? Define woman like me. Quinn looked at her, slow and unapologetic. Expensive watch. Shoes that cost more than my rent. That look like you haven't let anyone touch you in years. Selene didn't react. Not visibly. Her chest went tight, then looser, as if something had been correctly named. Tech, she said after a pause. Software, infrastructure, automation systems. Quinn whistled. Fancy. You asked, and you answered like a press release. Selene exhaled through her nose. I run a company. It requires precision. Quinn nodded as if tabling the point. And loneliness? Selene blinked, a small, involuntary startle. I didn't ask for a therapy session, she said tightly. Quinn didn't apologize. She just looked at her, steady, real. Maybe you didn't, she said. But you also didn't walk away. A gull landed on the broken fence and screamed at no one. The sound somehow made room for softer things. Asterisk Selene filed away the image like evidence. You could still go, she said, too quickly, and heard the solve in her own voice. Even part-time. There are ways to, hey! Quinn's gaze cut to her, warm and warning. You don't have to fix it. I said miss, not regret. They're different animals. Selene's mouth closed. The ocean exhaled for her, they fell quiet again, but it wasn't empty. A bar of sunlight slid under a low bank of cloud and set the water on fire. A couple pulled eye. What a disappointment, Selene said before she could stop herself. Quinn's grin was immediate, delighted. There she is. Selene felt heat bloom low in her sternum. She sat. For a while, they let the ocean do the talking. Waves wore themselves thin on the black teeth of rock below. A fisherman's boat moved like a sentence written too small to read. The sun hung low, casting orange streaks across the water that looked almost edible. Selene's hair whipped around her face until she tucked it behind one ear, fingers brushing skin that felt oddly warm. Oddly hers. "So," Quinn said, voice casual, stretched out on her hands with her boots crossed at the ankles. "What does a woman like you do?" "Define woman like me." Quinn looked at her, slow and unapologetic. "Expensive watch. Shoes that cost more than my rent. That look like you haven't let anyone touch you in years." Selene didn't react. Not visibly. Her chest went tight, then looser, as if something had been correctly named. "Tech," she said after a pause. "Software, infrastructure, automation systems." Quinn whistled. "Fancy, you asked, and you answered like a press release." Selene exhaled through her nose. "I run a company. It requires precision." Quinn nodded as if tabling the point. "And loneliness?" Selene blinked, a small, involuntary startle. "I didn't ask for a therapy session," she said tightly. Quinn didn't apologize. She just looked at her, steady, real. "Maybe you didn't," she said. "But you also didn't walk away." A gull landed on the broken fence and screamed at no one. The sound somehow made room for softer things. Asterisk Selene filed away the image like evidence. "You could still go," she said, too quickly, and heard the solve in her own voice. "Even part-time. There are ways to— Hey!" Quinn's gaze cut to her, warm and warning. "You don't have to fix it." I said, "Miss, not regret. They're different animals." Selene's mouth closed. The ocean exhaled for her. TV fell quiet again, but it wasn't empty. A bar of sunlight slid under a low bank of cloud and set the water. Selene swallowed. "How often is that?" "Depends on the day." Quinn looked at her like she could see the math running behind Selene's eyes. "How often for you?" Selene waited long enough that it nearly wasn't an answer. "Lately?" "Every day." The wind snuck under her collar and made a shiver into a shiver. Quinn slid off the rock and rummaged in the bike's side bag. She came back with an extra hoodie navy, soft, frayed at the cuffs. "Here," she said, holding it out. "Before you turn into a very expensive icicle." "I'm fine," Selene lead. "Sure, and I'm a ballerina." Quinn shook the hoodie once. "Arms up." Selene scoffed, then lifted her arms. Quinn eased the hoodie over her shoulders, careful around the silk of Selene's blouse like it was a living thing. For a second, her hands bracketed Selene's neck, warm against pulse. The world narrowed to the knit brush of cotton, the whisper of Quinn's breath. When the hoodie settled, Quinn tugged the hem gently, a small, competent gesture that felt like care. "Better?" she asked. Selene nodded. "I smell like you." The words slipped out, soft and unarmored. Quinn's eyes flashed, then softened. "There are worse fates." They didn't move for a long minute. The distance between them had recalibrated, still respectful. Newly charged dot down by the rocks, the white scrap jerked suddenly. Not plastic. A gull tangled in fishing line. It thrashed. Exhausted dot Quinn saw at the same moment Selene did. "Damn it." She stood. "Stay here." "That shelf is slick." Selene was already up. "I'm not staying." Quinn shot her a look that landed somewhere between admiration and alarm. "Fine, but step where I step." They picked their way down a goat path etched into the cliff, Quinn first, Selene behind, mirroring the placement of boot to rock, palm to rough trunk. Twice, Quinn reached back without looking, and Selene put her hand where it waited. The gull's panic sharpened the air. Its wing was pinned at an ugly angle by a loop of monofilament. Kneeling, Quinn cursed under her breath and took a pocket knife from her back pocket. "Hold the body." Firm but gentle. Selene knelt too. "Firm but gentle," she repeated, as if learning another language. The bird's heart hammered under her fingers, a tiny engine of terror. Selene's own pulse matched it, then gradually taught it another rhythm. She murmured, absurdly, to a creature with no interest in cooperation. I know. Quinn cut the line in 3 clean strokes. The gull exploded upward, stumbled, then found sky like it had filed a flight plan in its bones. It wheeled once above them as if confused by freedom, then arrowed out over the glittering plain. They stayed kneeling. Laughing, breathless, ridiculous, Quinn looked over at her, strands of hair slapped against her cheek by wind. "You're full of surprises, spreadsheet." Celine glanced at her hands, at the fine cuts the line had left. "I don't like watching things suffer." Quinn's smile gentled. "No, you like fixing what people say can't be fixed." Celine opened her mouth to disagree and found she didn't want to. Instead, she said, "Thank you for trusting me not to break it. Thank you for proving me right." Climbing back up took longer. Twice, Quinn braced her body and let Celine use her as leverage, palm to shoulder, knee to thigh. It was practical. It was also not. By the time they reached the turnout, both were flushed and a little giddy. The kind of lightheaded that comes from being reminded you have a body. They drank water from a dented bottle Quinn tossed her. The plastic was warm from the saddlebag. The water tasted faintly of metal and mint. Celine swallowed and felt something unlock that had nothing to do with thirst. "Hungry?" Quinn asked. Celine hesitated, then admitted, "Yes. There's a taco truck in town that changes lives." Quinn slid her helmet on, then paused. "We could also sit here until the stars come out and freeze to death in a meaningful way." "Tacos," Celine said, but with an existential after-dinner stroll. "Compromise. I respect it." Quinn swung a leg over the bike. "Climb on." Celine did. This time her hand found Quinn's hip without thinking, fingers splaying over warm leather like punctuation. The engine shuddered awake. The first turn back onto the highway felt like falling, and flying at the same time, they rode into town with the sun bruising into purple. The taco truck sat in a gravel lot beside the laundromat, a string of mismatched lights making a party out of nowhere. A teenage boy took their order with the solemnity of a notary public. They ate on an upturned crate. The tortillas were warm enough to fog the air between them. Celine tried not to moan. "Oh, it's like that." Quinn teased, mouth tilted. "It is precisely like that," Celine said, dabbing a dot of salsa from her wrist. "I feel personally betrayed that you did not warn me. I tried. You needed empirical evidence." Quinn reached without thinking and wiped a smear of cilantro from Celine's cheek with the pad of her thumb. The touch was nothing. The touch was everything. Conversation wandered how small towns keep score with pies, the best oil for old engines, a debate that nearly became a referendum on morality. Movies Quinn insisted were sacred, all on DVD, obviously. Celine listened more than she spoke, learning the ways Quinn's face told the truth ahead of her mouth. When the lot emptied and the air turned glass brittle with cold, they walked the 2 blocks to the pier. The wooden planks sang underfoot. A couple kissed against the railing. A man tried and failed to balance on a skateboard. Somebody's dog sneezed. "Close your eyes," Quinn said suddenly, stopping at the end of the pier. Celine arched a brow. "Absolutely not." Quinn grinned. "Humor me. I want to show you a thing I do when my head gets loud." Against her better judgment, Celine closed her eyes. "Okay," Quinn said, voice softer. "One hand on your own heart. One on the rail, feel the wood. Feel the beat. Match them. In, 2, 3. Out, 2, 3. Like you're making space where there wasn't any." Celine obeyed. She felt ridiculous for one breath. Then the second breath found her. By the fourth, her shoulders dropped an inch she hadn't realized they'd been guarding. The ocean made cathedral sounds. The town buzzed behind them like a hive. Somehow, both were permitted. "Open," Quinn whispered. Celine did. The stars had shown up without waiting for applause. The water took them personally. She didn't say anything. The wordless part of her said everything. Quinn bumped her shoulder gently. Better? Yes, Selene said, and the honesty didn't scare her. They walked back slowly, the kind of slow that isn't reluctance so much as acknowledgement. Outside the B&B, the porch light made a small, brave moon. Selene put her hand on the doorknob, then turned back. Thank you, she said. For... She gestured at the night, the cliff, the gull, the tacos, the breathing herself. Quinn's smile was easy. Any time. Then, after a beat, softer. I don't bring everyone up there. Selene felt the truth of that settle between her ribs. I'm glad you brought me. Quinn nodded, as if stamping something official that didn't need stamping. Sleep, tomorrow I'll show you the ugly part of town that only locals love. I thought we already did tacos. That was church. Selene laughed, quiet and surprised. Good night, Quinn. Night, Selene. Quinn took a step back, then hesitated like something else wanted saying. She didn't say it. She tapped 2 fingers to the brim of an imaginary cap and headed for her bike. Selene watched her go. The engine turned over a purr, a promise. The taillight traced a red line down the street until it turned and vanished. Only then did Selene realize her hand was still on the doorknob, knuckles white. She went upstairs and sat on the bed without taking off her boots. The room smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and the ghost of someone else's perfume. She pulled the hoodie over her head and curled onto her side, the map of salt and motor oil and warmth. When she closed her eyes, she felt the weight of the helmet in her hands again, the clutch and release of the bike beneath them, the clean line of Quinn's back against the falling dark. She didn't know what she was waiting for. Only that she was waiting now. And that when Quinn had leaned back on her elbows and said, So, tell me something that isn't about work. Selene had told the truth and the world had not ended. Outside, a late bus sighed past. Someone laughed in the hallway. The ocean kept its own counsel. Selene slept like a person who had been permitted to for the first time in N. Rain started just after dusk is low. Persistent downpour that turned the town into a watercolor painting. Streetlights shimmered in puddles. The neon diner sign flickered like a heartbeat. Selene watched it all from the window of her room, arms folded tightly across her chest. Her phone had no service. Good. She needed the silence. Needed the ache that came with it, the kind that didn't have a metric. Couldn't be graphed, wouldn't fit on a quarterly slide. Somewhere a door shut, a laugh tumbled up the stairwell, a kettle whistled and cut off. The inn smelled like lemon oil and old books and rain trying to be patient. Quinn had dropped her. Off after dinner, a burger joint with chipped booths and the best fries Selene had ever tasted. They hadn't talked much on the ride back. Selene's hand had rested at Quinn's waist again, but lower this time. Familiar now, expected and terrifying. Lightning stitched the horizon. A heartbeat later, thunder rattled the old window pane. The room dimmed. The lamp sighed itself to death. Her phone buzzed once with a message from the innkeeper. Power's out. Sorry for the inconvenience. Candles under the sink, Selene stared at it. Then, with uncharacteristic impulse, the kind that had once made her leap across a stage with abandon, she grabbed her coat. She took the stairs 2 at a time. The lobby was a cave of shadow. The front desk manned by a lucky cat statue that continued to wave in the dark, stubbornly cheerful. Outside, rain immediately found her collar and insisted on introduction. She pulled the coat tight and walked. The town had shrunk into itself. The chapel's steeple wore a haze. The diner's open sign blinked heroically. What a disappointment, Selene said before she could stop herself. Quinn's grin was immediate, delighted. There she is. Selene felt heat bloom low in her sternum. She sat. For a while, they let the ocean do the talking. Waves wore themselves thin on the black teeth of rock below. A fisherman's boat moved like a sentence written too small to read. The sun hung low, casting orange streaks across the water that looked almost edible. Selene's hair whipped around her face until she tucked it behind one ear, fingers brushing skin that felt oddly warm. Oddly hers. So, Quinn said, voice casual. stretched out on her hands with her boots crossed at the ankles. What does a woman like you do? Define woman like me. Quinn looked at her, slow and unapologetic. Expensive watch. Shoes that cost more than my rent. That look like you haven't let anyone touch you in years. Selene didn't react. Not visibly. Her chest went tight, then looser, as if something had been correctly named. Tech, she said after a pause. Software, infrastructure, automation systems. Quinn whistled. Fancy. You asked, and you answered like a press release. Selene exhaled through her nose. I run a company. It requires precision. Quinn nodded as if tabling the point. And loneliness? Selene blinked, a small, involuntary startle. I didn't ask for a therapy session, she said tightly. Quinn didn't apologize. She just looked at her, steady, real. Maybe you didn't, she said. But you also didn't walk away. A gull landed on the broken fence and screamed at no one. The sound somehow made room for softer things. Quinn nudged a pebble with the toe of her boot until it tumbled, end over end toward the edge. My turn, she said. I fix what people love when it breaks. Sometimes that's a carburetor. Sometimes it's the only things they have left of someone. She shrugged. It's not fancy, but it's honest. That sounds like a press release too, Selene said, almost smiling. Fine. The honest version? I like the way machines tell asterisk. You always like this? Selene asked finally, when the silence grew plush enough to lean on. Quinn glanced over. Like what? Unfiltered, warm, easy. Quinn pretended to consider. Only around people who need reminding they're allowed to be human. Selene folded the corner of the blanket between her fingers. Do you always assume that's what I need? No. Quinn took a swallow of beer. But you showed up in a storm instead of waiting it out. That's a towel. Selene looked down into the bottle's dark throat, as if she might read a future in the foam. What does it tell you? That you got tired of asking permission from a life you built. Quinn leaned her head back against the tire stack, watching Selene instead of the ceiling. And that you're cold. Selene frowned. I'm not. Give me your hands? Selene didn't move. Quinn waited. The rain filled in the argument Selene wasn't making. Finally, Selene extended her hands, palms up. Quinn covered them with her own, rough to soft, heat traded like a secret. Selene felt the steady drag of Quinn's calluses along the base of her fingers as if being read in braille. Better, Quinn said. Selene thought yes and said nothing. Thunder rolled low across the hills. Closer now, like furniture being dragged across a sky apartment. The blanket fort beckoned with its ridiculous promise. Quinn lifted the flap. You sure you don't want the couch? You're warm, Selene said before she could stop herself. Quinn froze, then smiled, the kind that makes a yes out of a person. So are you. They crawled inside. It smelled like cedar and detergent and the faint citrus of Quinn's shampoo. The lanterns made small constellations overhead out of the seams where quilt met tarp. Selene lay on her side and tried to remember how to inhabit a body without audience or agenda. Quinn lay on her back, one knee bent, one arm flung over her head in a posture that made surrender look like comfort. Tell me something you never say out loud. Quinn whispered into the hush. Selene's throat worked. The truth searched for an exit that wouldn't embarrass it. Sometimes I build things just to prove I can, she said at last. Not because I want them. Quinn didn't respond with anything shaped like advice. She didn't ha-ha or oh honey or fix. She just reached over, threaded their fingers together, and let the storm do the validating. Selene didn't let go. Minutes, hours were measured by rain. A drip from the roll-up door found a panned drum. Bear sighed himself to sleep. Somewhere in the loft above, a pipe pinned cooling metal. The town shrank to the size of this one bright pocket where Selene's breath found Quinn's and matched it without needing permission. Do you ever miss it? Quinn asked after a while, voice so quiet Selene felt it in their joined hands more than in her ear. Miss what? Dancing. Celine stared at the nearest lantern until it flared and softened and flared again. Yes, she swallowed. But sometimes I think what I'm missing is how it made me honest. Movement has no PR. Quinn considered that with the gravity of a mechanic diagnosing a subtle noise. We can make a little movement policy right here, she murmured. No press. No panel of experts. Just us and gravity. Selene turned her head. Are you trying to get me to dance in your garage during a thunderstorm? Quinn's grin was audible. Obviously. Selene was halfway to a protest when the lantern above them flickered again and the fort felt smaller, safer. She sat up. I don't have music. Quinn squeezed her hand. You have rain. So they danced, if it could be called that, on the concrete just outside the fort. Socked feet sliding, hands tentative, and then not. Quinn counted a rhythm that wasn't in 4 quarters, more like the coastline itself. Hold, sway, step, breathe. Selene let her cheek hover near Quinn's temple, not touching, close enough to feel the heat that would be there if she did. The lanterns painted them into a softer version of themselves. You're leading, Quinn teased without letting go. Force of habit, Selene said, and tried to surrender 1 inch at a time. A loud crack made them both jump, only a rolling door settling. They laughed with their whole bodies, and the laughter did something structural to the room. Okay, Quinn said, breathless. Before we break a hip, back to the nest. They collapsed into the fort again, pulses misbehaving, grinning at nothing. Selene's hair had fallen entirely out of its miracle braid. She didn't fix it. Quinn tugged the blanket so it covered them both up to the collarbone. Tell me something you're afraid of, Quinn said into the shared dark. Selene considered lying. Then didn't. I'm afraid that if I stop moving, I'll disappear. Quinn turned her head on the pillow. You're here. That's the opposite of disappearing. Selene exhaled a laugh that wasn't a laugh. That's not how my math works. Then your math is broken, Quinn said gently. Good news. I fix things. Selene huffed. And what does the mechanic prescribe? First, we don't catastrophize in a storm fort, Quinn said solemnly. Second, we establish emergency protocols. She lifted their joined hands. Protocol A, when thunder is too loud, we hold on. Protocol B, we practice being still for 1 minute without checking a device. Protocol C, we admit when lasagna was the right choice. Selene's mouth softened. I can comply with C and A. Selene didn't answer with words. She tightened her fingers. The quiet deepened until it could have been mistaken for sleep. At some point, Selene shifted, her head finding the shape of Quinn's shoulder like the next line of a sentence. Quinn adjusted nothing. Her breath was easy. An invitation Selene accepted again and again. Without running out of acceptance, dot lightning found the ocean and wrote its name there. The thunder that followed moved furniture again. Selene flinched. A leftover reflex from a childhood, spent counting seconds between flash and sound and pretending that was control. It's only weather, Quinn murmured. I know. Selene's voice was paper. I don't like not being able to see what's coming. Quinn tilted her head until her temple touched Selene's hair. Me neither. But sometimes the lights go out and you get a fort. Selene smiled into the blanket, ridiculous and rescued, and 30-something and new. A soft paw thumped near their feet. Bear wormed himself under the edge of the quilt with the entitlement of a creature who had never read a boundary. Quinn made room with her heel. Selene's toes found warm fur. The 3 of them made a strange constellation that felt inevitable. How long until the power comes back? Selene asked eventually, drowsy. Depends, Quinn said. On wind. On a guy named Javi who knows the substation's moods. On whether the universe wants us to practice stillness a little longer. Selene nodded as if that were a reasonable dependency tree. Why did you call me Ice Queen? She asked, not quite curious, not quite challenging. Quinn sighed. Because you walk like the air is a suit of armor. Because when you first looked at me, you were doing calculus and trash. Because you don't sweat when you should. And because I figured if I said it out loud, you might get mad enough to melt. Did it work? Quinn pretended to think. You're in my fort, Heart? Celine let herself laugh, small and felt. Don't get used to it. Too late. They drifted. Rain drew slower handwriting on the roof. Somewhere between one breath and the next, Celine fell asleep to the sound of Quinn breathing, her own chest rising in time. Morning came pale and soft, as if the sky were apologizing. The rain had stopped. The windows were pearled with drying drops. The lot outside was a sheet of dull silver. The radio stayed silent. The office computer sat like a paperweight. Celine didn't notice Dot, not yet. She woke to warmth and the particular quiet of a place that has done its work of keeping. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. Then the fort breathed when she moved, and Quinn made a sleep noise that might have been a word. Celine studied her. Close, daylight was unkind to lies. Quinn's curls had flattened into some new expression of themselves. Oil smudged the edge of her jaw. A tiny scar bisected her left eyebrow. The kind you get from forgetting the wrench is still under tension. Her mouth, unguarded in sleep, said please, and don't you dare in the same line. Celine's hand, which had a strict policy of minding its own business, lifted an inch. 2. She didn't touch. The wanting to was a fact big enough to set down between them. Quinn blinked awake. It took 2 seconds to orient, another to smile. Hey, Celine echoed. They lay there identical and different, until bare decided gratitude demanded forward momentum and licked Quinn's elbow. Quinn yelped. The fort shuddered with laughter again. Coffee? Quinn asked, voice morning dash rough dot double quotes yes. Celine said devoutly. The power was still out, but Quinn had a camping stove and opinions. She poured water from a dented kettle over grounds in a ceramic cone and refused to let Celine apologize for being visibly. Relieved by the smell of competence, they drank from mismatched mugs, one with a chipped lip, one that said world's okayest mechanic, and sat on the threshold where the concrete met the freshly rinsed world. The town was making slow noises of resuming. Somewhere a generator coughed itself persuasive. Celine's phone, long dead, lay face down on the workbench like a dog who'd rolled in something. She didn't touch it. What's on your docket today spreadsheet? Quinn asked softly. Celine wrapped both hands around the mug. Not disappearing. Quinn looked sideways at her, and the look said more than most treaties. They finished their coffee. Quinn stood and stretched, the hem of her shirt flashing a thin line of skin above the waistband of her sweats. Celine looked catalogued, permitted herself the human act of appreciating without planning. Showers are cold, Quinn warned. But they exist. I've done worse. Quinn raised a brow. Bored retreats, Celine said darkly. And Quinn snorted. Celine washed her face at the utility sink and found a clean towel that had known better days. She felt raw and alive and slightly ridiculous. She watched Quinn move around the shop, turning lanterns off one by one, shaking water from a tarp, coaxing the radio into static. And then into a song that might have been from a decade neither of them wanted to specify. Celine stood in the doorway, and something in her loosened like a bolt that had been over-torqued for years. Thank you, she said. For what? Quinn asked, genuinely puzzled. For the fort, Celine said. For the lasagna. For not insisting the couch was better for my image. She paused. For your hands. Quinn swallowed a smile. Any time. Then, after a beat, even the hands? Especially the hands, Celine said, and the room took note of the honesty and decided not to make a fuss. The power would come back eventually. Javi would coax the substation into cooperation with the particular gossip of wires. Phones would wake and demand tribute. The world would clear its throat, but not yet. For now, there was a fort and 2 mugs cooling on concrete, and a mechanic who smelled like citrus and rain, and a woman who built empires emitting. She sometimes wanted to be small enough to fit inside a moment and stay. Celine looked at the silent phone. Then away. Teach me something, she said. Quinn grinned. How to swear creatively when a bolt strips. How to change a tire, Celine said, serious. Properly. No silk blouses allowed. Quinn tossed her a pair of battered gloves. Then we start with jack points. Rule 1. Respect the weight of the thing you're lifting. Celine pulled the gloves on. They were too big. She didn't mind out outside. The sun shouldered through what remained of the storm and found the chrome on a line of bikes and made a small, private spectacle of itself. Inside, Celine learned where to place her hands so that the machine and the moment both held. Later, there would be statements in boardrooms and 1,000 opinions that weren't invited. Later, there would be a city dot for now. There was this dot, and for the first time in a long time. This was enough. Sunlight spilled into the garage through high windows dusted with salt and time. The power remained off, but the world outside had returned to motion birds chattering in nearby trees. Tires on wet pavement, a breeze carrying the smell of pine. Celine awoke slowly, consciousness blooming in soft waves. She was still tucked into the blanket fort, Quinn breathing steadily beside her, their legs tangled in the mess of quilts. Her hand was still in Quinn's, and somewhere during the night, their bodies had curled toward each other like instinct. Celine blinked at the ceiling dot she should move. She should put space between them. She should remember who she was, but Quinn stirred, murmured something unintelligible, and tightened her grip around Celine's fingers, and Celine stayed. They moved around each other like old rhythm by noon. Quinn brewed coffee on a camping stove. Celine washed her face in the staff sink and found a hair tie tucked into her coat pocket. The fort became a low, domestic constellation at their backs. The lanterns were dark now, but their memory kept the corner warm. They didn't speak about the night dot, not yet. The coop was still dead. Its diagnostics screen blank. Celine stood by the hood as Quinn leaned in, sleeves rolled up, curls pulled back with a pen. "You really know your way around a machine," Celine said. Watching her. "They don't lie," Quinn replied, voice muffled. "Engines are honest. They break when they need to. No pretending." Celine didn't say anything, but Quinn looked up, face smudged, eyes sharp. "You pretending?" Celine turned away. "Always." Quinn straightened. "That sounds exhausting." "It is." They stood in silence again. "And then, come here," Quinn said softly. Celine hesitated. "I want to show you something." She stepped closer. Quinn reached for her hand. Their palms met, skin warm and rough and soft all at once. Quinn guided her fingers to the edge of a loose hose clamp. "Twist that." Celine did. Quinn covered her hand with hers, adjusting her grip. Her chest brushed Celine's shoulder. Celine's breath hitched. "Like this," Quinn murmured. Celine turned her head slightly, close enough to see the flecks of gold in Quinn's eyes. Close enough to smell lavender and motor oil. "You're doing great." Quinn whispered dot, and Celine, for once, believed it. The clamp clicked into place. But neither of them moved. Quinn didn't let go. Her thumb brushed lightly over Celine's knuckles. Celine looked down at their hands. Then up. "You're not afraid of me," she said. "No," Quinn replied. "But you are." Celine tried to speak, failed. Quinn didn't push, just held her hand a moment longer, then let go. The absence of that touch felt louder than the storm had. The day found its shape in small chores. Quinn pulled the battery to trickle charge it off a portable pack. Celine swept the bay, incompetent at first, then purposeful. Bear supervised, deeply invested in the fate of a squeaky toy that had lost the squeak years ago. Outside, the sky kept practicing blue. Celine washed her hands at the utility sink and stared at the gray ribbon of water. Grease had gotten into the lines of her palms, into the pale crescents of her nails. She didn't hate it. It felt like proof she had touched something that touched back. At some point, Quinn looked up and caught Celine looking. She didn't tease. She held the look until something inside Celine rearranged into a truth she could no longer misfile. "Wanting is not the same as weakness. Walk with me," Quinn said later, when the shadows had lengthened enough to be useful. They took the alley that ran behind the shop, where wild fennel grew with aspirations, and the air smelled like mint and old wood. A cat considered them from a windowsill and declined engagement. At the end of the alley, the world widened into a small bluff. The ocean was less dramatic here, more like a promise kept. Quinn stopped and leaned her hip against a rail that had opinions about corrosion. "Hold out your hand," she said. Celine did. Quinn placed a smooth pebble in her palm, oval and the exact temperature of Quinn's skin. "This is the way of not knowing," she said. "Feel it?" Celine closed her fingers, and the pebble announced itself there. Present, undeniable. "Yes." Quinn placed a second pebble in the other hand. "This is the weight of pretending you do." Celine held both. The first felt honest, heavy, and somehow kind. The second felt tight, artificially dense, like a secret held too long. "Which do you want to carry?" Quinn asked. Celine opened the hand with the second pebble and let it drop. It landed in the grass like something that had never truly belonged to her. Quinn nodded as if they had concluded a business transaction in which everyone got what they needed. "Good." She reached over and turned Celine's remaining hand, slow, deliberate, until the pebble pressed into the soft skin at the base of her thumb. "Now hold this one." Not too tight. Celine realized their hands were a conversation. She answered by not looking away. The wind found them and made ceremony of nothing. Quinn stepped closer, not a move, not a question, just proximity offered like shelter. Celine felt the moment lean toward a kiss and didn't step into it. Neither did Quinn. Consent, even with gravity, requires choosing. Quinn lifted her free hand and tucked a strand of hair behind Celine's ear. Her knuckles brushed the arc of Celine's cheekbone. Her fingertips found a pulse point and memorized it. "You're warm," she said, as if amending the record. "And you keep saying that," Celine replied, voice lower than either of them expected, "because it keeps being true." They stood like that until the tide licked the base of the bluff and the sky began its slow apprenticeship to gold. Back at the shop, Quinn set a record on a small turntable that had to be repaired every third song. Music filled the corner's old soul that believed in vowels and apology. Celine leaned against the hood of the car that had betrayed her and felt betrayed by fewer things. "Teach me something else," she said. Quinn looked up from the turntable. "You already danced in a fort. You installed a clip so well the little song applauded. You threw away the heavy lie rock. You want my state secrets?" "I want your hands," Celine said, and watched realization bloom slow and bright across Quinn's face. "On mine?" she added, and let the pause be a kind of petition. Quinn crossed the space between them, eyes never leaving Celine's. She lifted Celine's right hand with both of hers, turned it palm up, and traced the long lines there with a thumb that had sworn to be gentle before it touched. "This," she said, ghosting over the lifeline, "is not a prediction. It's a map of where pressure has called you, of what you carry and where you refuse to put it down." Celine's breath stuttered. "Then what do you advise?" "Redistribute the load," Quinn murmured. She placed Celine's hand flat against her own sternum, over the cotton of her shirt, over heat and steady drum. "There, that's where I keep the heavy things." "Short term." Celine froze. "LL me to stop," Quinn said, all lightness gone. Celine didn't. The garage brightened one shade without the sun moving it all. Her hand rose and fell with Quinn's breath. The rhythm taught Celine something about time she had forgotten. She felt ridiculous tears prick and didn't apologize for them. Not this time. Quinn guided Celine's other hand to the hollow just below her throat, then let go, a deliberate surrender of control. "You're holding," she said softly, "not gripping." "I'm learning," Celine said. The words shook. "Do you feel?" She stopped, blushed, retooled. "Is this okay?" "It's better than okay," Quinn said. "It's real." They stayed there for a breath that lasted 3 minutes, a minute that lasted a lifetime. When Quinn finally lifted her own hands, it was only to frame Celine's face, thumbs resting in front of her ears, forefingers threaded into dark hair. "Not yet," Quinn whispered, answering the question the air kept asking them. But soon? Celine nodded once, relief, and walked collapsing into something steadier. Trust. Evening gathered itself. Quinn reheated soup. Celine insisted on doing the dishes. They argued about the correct way to stack bowls and decided both were right. Bear announced that the day had been successfully dogged and requested a parade. Quinn obliged with a biscuit and a confetti of praise. Before sleep, they stood in the bay with the door rolled up to frame a rectangle of darkening sky. The first star declared. The second pretended not to care. The town exhaled. Quinn reached for Celine's hand again. The new normal. Tomorrow, she said, we make the little song happen for the rest of it. And if it doesn't sing? Celine asked. Then we check the connection, Quinn said. We don't force it. We don't call it broken because it's quiet. We listen again. Celine leaned her shoulder into Quinn's. I can do that. I know, Quinn said simply. They didn't kiss. They didn't need to. The touch between them had learned to name itself without translation. Later, in the fourth that had learned. Their wait, Celine lay awake long enough to memorize the idea that had been growing all day. Some hands don't take. They hold, and some hearts don't demand. They invite. When sleep found her, it did so the way Quinn had shown her to hold the pebble present. Not too tight, honest about the weight of not knowing what came next. And in the space between one breath and the next, Celine decided that uncertainty was no longer the enemy. It was the proof she'd finally arrived. Celine's phone came back to life at 6:03. It buzzed with pent-up Fury 42 unread messages. 3 missed video calls, and a calendar stacked so tight the interface lagged. The screen threw a cold square of light across the B&B's quilt as if it could shame her back into orbit. She stood by the window, watching the sun creep over wet shingles and mist-laced hills, and didn't touch it. Not yet. Downstairs, the innkeeper clinked dishes. The scent of burnt toast floated up with an optimism that felt almost defiant. Her watch buzzed again. Assistant, where are you? Tokyo account is panicking. Board meeting at 9. Celine turned it off. She set the phone face down on the nightstand like a sleeping animal and let herself breathe to a count of 8, something she'd learned from a coach who charged $2,000 an hour to tell powerful people that air was free. The rain had been scrubbed from the sky. The town looked hungover and hopeful. Celine showered in a stall that complained about the temperature and dressed in the same clothes as yesterday, which felt like an admission of humanity she wasn't sure how to price. She found Quinn at the garage, barefoot on the concrete, singing softly under her breath as she adjusted a carburetor on a vintage Harley. She wore a tank top smudged with grease and looked like she belonged to the earth itself, gravity's favorite. Celine froze in the doorway, not because of what Quinn was doing, but because of what Celine would have to become the second she left this town. Morning. Quinn called, not looking up. Coffee's hot. Mugs on the bench. Celine poured herself a cup. No cream, no sugar. Exactly right. She took a sip and felt the bitter honesty of it all the way down. You didn't answer your messages, Quinn said eventually, glancing at her. You saw that? Quinn gestured toward the counter where Celine had abandoned her phone last night. Thing lit up like a Christmas tree. Thought it might explode. Celine took a long sip. I needed space. Quinn set down her wrench, wiped her hands on a rag, walked over. And what happens now? She asked, no push, no pout. Just question. Celine looked up. I go back. Of course. Quinn nodded like a fact had been confirmed about Tide's. Silence stretched. Not awkward, but heavy as if the air had expectations. Come with me, Celine said suddenly, the words surprising her mouth on their way out. Quinn blinked. To the city? Celine nodded. Just for a day. See it. See me. Quinn studied her, taking measurements that had nothing to do with inches. You sure? No, Celine said, honesty burning pleasantly. But I want to be. Quinn's smile moved slow, like weather clearing. Okay, I'll grab a jacket. The drive was quiet. Celine rented a car, sleek, silver, forgettable, and handed Quinn the keys. Quinn drove with one hand on the wheel, windows cracked. Just enough to let the sea remind them it existed, music low enough to be permission not to talk. Bear snored in the back for the first 10 miles and then, realizing this was a very long nap car, settled. They passed farm stands with chalkboard signs, vineyards pretending to be modest, a gas station whose marquee simply read, "We have pies." The highway unspooled into wider lanes, then into the kind of engineered certainty that never had to make room for a deer dot at the county line. Celine's phone found service and began to scream. She flipped it over, watched notifications breed. Like rabbits, and then, without ceremony, slid it back into the glove box. She looked at Quinn. "I'm choosing." Quinn tipped 2 fingers from the wheel in a small salute. Noted. They arrived at Celine's building just after sunset. The city had put on its jewelry. Glass and chrome caught the last of the day and bent it into something human eyes could mistake for magic. The doorman bowed with the kind of familiarity that had a payroll line item. The elevator recognized Celine's face before she recognized her own in the reflection. Quinn said nothing. Celine watched Quinn's reflection in the mirrored walls and wondered what she saw. Herself, a horizon, a trap. The elevator whispered to the top floor in less time than it takes to change your mind. The door opened to a space carved out of air-white stone. Curated lighting, silence so thick it echoed off itself. The living room was a gallery of negative space and strong intentions. A single painting hung on one wall, a field of near black with the barest suggestion of light clawing up from the bottom left corner. "Wow," Quinn murmured. "Do you live here or curate exhibitions in it?" Eileen smiled tightly. "Mostly the latter." Quinn toed off her boots without being asked and walked to the windows. The skyline arranged itself for inspection. "You're a ghost here," she said, not unkindly. Celine's voice cracked. "I know." She took off her coat, unclipped her hair. Let it fall. Quinn turned, and something in her softened. "You look like you just stepped out of your own armor." Celine didn't answer. Quinn crossed the room slowly, took her hand. The gesture made a noise somewhere behind Celine's ribs. "I don't need to be impressed by your world," Quinn said. "I just want to see the part of it that belongs to you." Celine swallowed, then stay tonight. "See all of it." Quinn leaned in, forehead touching hers. "Only if you promise not to disappear come morning." Celine closed her eyes and said the one thing she had never said to anyone. "In any boardroom, any contract, any room like this, I don't want to be alone anymore." Quinn kissed her in the city. For one night, held its breath. They didn't rush. The kiss was the kind that understood the stakes. When they parted, Quinn rested her forehead against Celine's again and said, "Show me your life." Celine did. She led Quinn through rooms that looked like pages torn from a magazine. The office with its glass desk and a view so severe it felt like a reprimand. The kitchen with knives so sharp they seemed theoretical. The bedroom enormous and unruffled as a showroom. Celine opened drawers normally closed. The one with the mismatched tea she never had time to drink. The one with the handful of seashells from a vacation she had cut short after 12 hours because the Wi-Fi was bad. Quinn picked up a shell, held it to her ear, and listened like she expected honest testimony. "I hear traffic," she said, deadpan. Celine laughed too loud in the white room and didn't apologize. On the hallway console lay a row of silver frames bought by an assistant to imply history. One was empty, the stock photo family lulled into a drawer and never replaced. Celine stared at the vacancy as if it might confess something. Quinn noticed and didn't comment. She simply slid her fingers across the console until they found Celine's and threaded them together again. "Hungry?" Quinn asked. "Yes," Celine said. Surprised to discover it had nothing to do with food. They ordered takeout from the place that knew. Celine's address and her preference for the soup arriving still at the temperature of the sun. Quinn opened the containers on the coffee table that had never been touched by a coffee ring and made a picnic out of opulence. They ate cross-legged. Quinn dropped a dumpling on the rug and swore with the creativity of someone who had wrangled stubborn bolts. Celine fetched a cloth and removed the stain with an efficiency that startled them both. "Of course you know how to get oil out of silk," Quinn said, watching her. "Of course you think the rug is silk," Celine countered. And Quinn laughed into her water after. Quinn found a small stack of records next to a turntable that looked decorative, but, to its credit, functioned. She lifted one sleeve. "You own vinyl," she said, impressed. "It came with the staging," Celine said. "But I keep it." Quinn set the needle as carefully as she set torque. Music unfurled, warm and crackling, a jazz record that made the apartment remember it had a floor. Quinn offered a hand. "Dance?" Celine accepted. They moved without choreography, bodies learning the perimeter of permission. Celine's cheek hovered near Quinn's temple. Quinn's hand at Celine's back was a fact she could build on. The windows reflected them back at themselves like witnesses. Far below, a siren argued with the song. Inside, the saxophone insisted on tenderness. "You're not bad," Quinn murmured. "I'm underqualified for compliments," Celine said. And Quinn made a soft noise of disagreement into her collarbone. When the song ended, they didn't unclasp immediately. Quinn brushed her mouth once against Celine's jaw. "A cartographer checking a border. Come see the balcony," Celine said. Needing air and sharing to be the same thing, the balcony ran the length of the living room, more runway than porch. The night poured itself around them, unbothered. They leaned on the railing, shoulder to shoulder, looking down at an ant colony that had learned to drive. Wind found the loose hair at Celine's nape and wrote its name there. "What did you have to leave behind to build this?" Quinn asked quietly. "Everything that didn't fit in a carry-on," Celine said. "Friends who wanted me on Tuesdays, dancing, the version of myself who ordered dessert. The part of me that believed I could have a home without putting my name on the deed." She shook her head, the honesty making her bold and a little dizzy. "You?" Quinn considered. "A degree I couldn't afford. A city that asked for more than I could give without losing the part of me that knew where North was." She glanced over. "A relationship that only loved me when I was useful." Celine's hand found hers again, not by accident. "I don't want that for you." "From me, then don't make me into a doorstop for your life," Quinn said. Not angry, anchored. "I won't." Celine turned to face her fully, back to the city as if choosing sides. "But I don't know how to do this where cameras live." "Practice." Quinn squeezed her fingers. "Start small." She lifted their joined hands and kissed Celine's knuckles like punctuation. "Like that." The air felt different after. Night deepened. The city made a low, endless sound like a big cat purring around to kill. On the way to bed, they passed the empty frame on the console again. Celine stopped. "Hold this," she said. Picking it up and handing it to Quinn obliged, baffled. Celine opened a drawer. Took out a Polaroid camera she used for product mock-ups when engineers are being theatrical about documentation. She looked at Quinn. "We're not posing," Quinn warned, though she half smiled. "No." Celine lifted the camera. "Just proof with presence." They stood close, not careful. Celine clicked. The square word out like a small, eager lie. They watched together as ghost shapes chose to exist. Two women, slightly blurred, absolutely there. Celine slid the photo into the frame and set it on the console, not centered. Quinn looked at it for a long beat. "What?" "You look happy," Quinn said. "And I look like I believe you." Celine swallowed. "Good." They didn't stage the night into something it wasn't ready to be. They undressed without theater, separately but in the same room, pausing occasionally to confirm the other wasn't accidentally breaking. Celine handed Quinn a t-shirt from a drawer that smelled like cedar and lavender. Quinn held it to her face and pronounced it ridiculously soft. In bed, they lay on top of the covers like cautious tourists of a new country. Quinn's hand found Celine's where it waited on the sheet and rested there. Palm to palm. "Tell me what morning looks like when it doesn't scare you," Quinn said into the dark. Celine considered the shape of such a morning like a problem worth solving. "Coffee," A window that opens. Someone whose first question isn't what I can do for them. She breathed, then added, smaller, a hand that doesn't let go just because the phone rings. Quinn squeezed once. We can build that. Selene turned on her side, brought their joined hands to her chest. Stay, she said, and it was neither command nor plea. It was engineering, a request to test a hypothesis under real conditions. Okay, Quinn said. They slept. Selene dreamed of water, of moving through it without keeping time, of surfacing because breath wanted her more than fear did. At 5:57 a.m., the city's light shifted from night to ambition. Selene woke to the weight and comfort of Quinn's arm draped across her waist, to Bear's soft snore from the foot of the bed. The dog had negotiated admission with a look that invented precedent, to the sound of her phone buzzing faintly. From the bread drawer like a trapped insect, she lay there in the newness. And let it be, then she reached for Quinn's hand and threaded their fingers again. Morning. Quinn mumbled. Morning. Selene answered. The phone kept buzzing. Selene didn't move. Not yet. The world would ask for her soon. But for a sliver of dawn, in a room that looked like a decision she could revise, she chose to be where she was. Outside, a jet carved a white line through a good sky. The city inhaled. The day sharpened its teeth. Selene breathed with it and didn't look away. The morning after should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt like exposure. Selene woke alone in her own bed and mattress designed by some Scandinavian minimalist. Sheets softer than logic, and yet it all felt foreign. She blinked against sunlight spilling across glass walls. Her throat was dry. Her heart louder than it should be. The space beside her was warm, but empty. She sat up. Quinn stood on the balcony, barefoot, wearing one of Selene's white dress shirts, sleeves rolled, collar open. Her hair was messy. Her gaze distant. Selene patted out slowly. Morning, she said. Quinn turned, smiled faintly. Hey. They stared at each other for a moment. And then the moment turned. Quinn's phone buzzed on the glass table. She glanced at it. Selene did too. It wasn't her phone. It was Selene's assistant, calling again. Then again. 3 missed calls. Quinn handed it over without a word. Selene didn't answer. But the magic had cracked. They dressed in silence. Selene offered breakfast. Quinn declined. Gotta get back. Shop opens at 10. Selene nodded, tried to stay composed. I'll call a car, she said. Quinn raised an eyebrow. I drove us here. Right. Selene followed her to the elevator. Neither of them spoke until they reached the lobby. Thanks for everything, Quinn said, like it was already over. Selene forced a smile. Of course. Quinn turned. Paused. Double quotes. You meant what you said last night. Selene swallowed. Yes. Then don't disappear. The door slid shut. And Selene exhaled like she was breaking apart. Back upstairs, she stared at her phone. Then answered the next call. It was her coup, speaking fast. We have a situation. Someone leaked a photo. Selene blanked. What photo? You and a woman. On a motorcycle? In the mountains. You weren't alone, Selene. You were very visibly not alone. A beat of silence. We need to get ahead of it. Clean the narrative. She could be a liability. The word landed like a punch. Selene stared at the skyline. I'll handle it. She didn't handle it well. She sent Quinn a message. I need time. Things are complicated. I'll explain. Quinn replied. Don't bother. Selene sent flowers. They were returned. She wired money for the repairs. It was sent back with a single note. I'm not for sale. The silence stretched for days. Selene drowned in meetings. PR spin. Headlines she didn't read. She stopped sleeping. Stopped caring. Then one night, long past midnight, she found the napkin. From the diner, grease-stained, folded in half. Inside, Quinn had written, don't build walls just to feel powerful. Love isn't a threat. It's the proof you survived. Selene stared at it. until the sun came up. And then she drove. The garage was closed when she arrived. Rain threatened again. Thunder in the distance. Celine stood outside, coat dripping, hand frozen mid-dash. Knocked. The door opened. Before she could touch it, Quinn stood there, arms crossed, jaw tight. What do you want? Celine opened her mouth, closed it. Then, to apologize, to explain, to be better. Quinn didn't move. I was scared, Celine continued. Not of the photo, not of the press, of what you made me feel, of how easy it was to want more. Quinn's eyes glinted. You ran. I did. And I hate myself for it. The rain started, soft and cold. Celine stepped closer. You make me feel like I can breathe. And I don't know what to do with that except ask you to try again. Not as a scandal. Not as a secret. Just ... us. Quinn was quiet for a long moment. Then she stepped aside. Get in here before you drown. Spreadsheet. And Celine, for the first time in days, smiled like she meant it. The rain didn't stop for hours. It drummed gently on the garage roof while Celine sat on a stool beside Quinn's workbench, watching her move through the space like it was part of her. Bear lay curled at their feet, tail thumping every so often. Neither of them rushed to speak. Celine didn't mind. The silence between them had changed, no longer the quiet of things unsaid, but the calm after a storm. Finally, Quinn looked up. Her eyes were clearer, softer. I'm not going to be someone you hide, she said. You never were, Celine replied. But I needed to stop hiding from myself first. Quinn leaned against the counter, arms folded. That city of yours your world. It chews people up, Celine nodded. It does. But I'm learning how to bite back. A flicker of a smile. Your assistant left 6 voicemails today, Quinn said casually. I'll deal with her tomorrow. You're really staying? Celine stood, crossed the space between them, took Quinn's hands. I'm not just staying, she said. I'm rebuilding. On my terms. And I want that to include you. Quinn looked at their hands. You don't even like mud. I like you. Quinn raised an eyebrow. That's dangerous talk. Celine smiled. Good thing I'm used to risk. Quinn laughed, the sound like a match struck in the dark. Come on, spreadsheet. I'll teach you how to change a tire properly. No silk blouses allowed. Days passed. Then weeks. Celine started splitting her time between the city and the coast. Her company didn't collapse. The scandal didn't break her. In fact, stock rose. Turns out, humanity sells. And love? Love held. They painted the garage together one Sunday, Celine in old jeans, Quinn in a backwards cap. They fought over playlist choices. Made up with kisses, Celine danced again, barefoot in the garage to whatever Quinn was humming. And sometimes, late at night, Quinn whispered into her hair, Still not afraid? And Celine would say, Only of losing this. But she didn't. They built something stronger than either expected. Not perfect, but real. And when Celine finally renamed her company's next expansion project, she did it quietly without a press release. Just one word etched into the foundation. Quinn. Because sometimes steel bends. And sometimes fire doesn't destroy, it forges.